Chapter 10, Revelations. After I hung up the phone, I sat on the sofa in the dark living room and cried softly, thinking about Carrie, little May, and Aunt Sarah and what they must be going through. I wondered how Grandma Olivia and Grandpa Samuel were taking the news of their son's death. Nothing could be worse than losing a child, I thought, no matter how old the child was at the time or how aloof and cold at your heart you were. Uncle Jacob had resented my coming and living with him and his family, but most of the time I thought that was because my presence made the loss of Laura that much harder to bear. Right from the beginning, Aunt Sarah treated me as if I had been sent to replace Laura. But I knew as far as Uncle Jacob was concerned, no one could ever replace his daughter. He had been hard sometimes, downright cruel to me, but I also recalled moments when he gazed at me with much softer, kinder eyes, especially after he heard me sing and play the fiddle, and often when he didn't think I was aware of his gaze. He was a hard-working man who wanted to provide for his family the best as he could. His religious zeal often made him cold and unpleasant to me, but on more than one occasion, Carrie hinted that his father had become more devout and sterner after Laura died, somehow blaming himself for her death. When he was in the hospital that first time, he asked to see me at his bedside, and because he thought he was dying, he confessed to me that he and my mother had done something sinful together when they were young. At the time, he made it seem like he blamed himself for my mother's wild ways. Later on, when she was older. Afterward, he denied saying those things. Ashamed of what he had told me, he found my presence even harder to bear. I'm sure he was happy when I decided to leave to find my mother, as happy as Grandma Olivia was to see me go. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Minutes later, I fell asleep and didn't waken until I heard the door open, followed by loud laughter. "Why is it so dark in here?" I heard Richard say before snapping on the lamp. The shock of the light made me blink and rub my eyes, and I sat up quickly. Well, look who's waiting for us," he said. "Why are you still up and dressed?" "How was your dinner, Melanie?" Mommy asked. "You didn't drink too much wine or anything, did you? Did you bring Mel up here?" She scanned the room as to look for evidence of his having been in the apartment. She wobbled a bit but took a step closer and focused on me with some effort. Finally noticing how red my eyes were and the streaks of tears made down my cheeks. "What's going on now?" she demanded. "Uncle Jacob," I said and swallowed, taking too long for her. "What about him?" "I can't imagine anything about him that would interest me," she told Richard, who laughed. "Well, what did he do?" "He died," I said. "His heart gave out at the hospital." She stared, the news having a sobering effect on her. I saw her face move through a myriad of emotions, and the shock to sadness, to anger, and then indifference. She smirked first at Richard before turning back to me. "His heart, as you call it, gave out a long time ago. I don't wish anything bad on anyone, but I can't pretend to be terribly upset about it," she said, the mirth all gone from her eyes and lips. "But you grew up with him and Daddy. You can't be so uncaring," I replied. "You don't know anything about what my life was like growing up with Jacob and a so-called brother, Melanie." Mommy flared back at me. "I can't forget how he treated me afterward, and when the trouble began for me and Chester." The anger in her eyes stunned me so much I was speechless. "I don't like anyone bringing bad news to Gina," Richard said, suddenly pretending to be very protective. "Especially news about her past, and especially the night before she has an audition." "Yes," Mommy said, smiling with a proud gleam in her eyes. "I have something exciting to try out for tomorrow. A part in a television sitcom. I've got to get right to bed. That's why we came home so early," she added. I looked at the clock. Early? It was past 1 o'clock. Was that supposed to mean? What's late supposed to mean? "You should go to sleep yourself," Richard said. "You have a lot of work ahead of you," he laughed and headed for the bedroom. "I do feel sorry for Sarah and the children," Mommy said, her voice somewhat softer. "Sarah was always nice to me." She sighed and pulled her head back a little as if to swallow back some errant tears. Then she looked at me with a small smile on her lips. If you think you should go back to the funeral, it's all right. I can't have anything more to do with them. Whatever tears I would spill would be one more tear than his mother will anyway. Believe me, she said. You hate her very much, don't you? I asked. The corners of her mouth whitened with her rage. Yes, I won't deny it, I do. And she has no love for me either, Melanie. Her eyes glared hotly, and then her expression returned to one of self-pity. She groaned. I hate going to sleep feeling upset, she said, and she turned toward the bedroom. I wish you hadn't told me about it. I watched her go in and close the door, and I rose and went to bed myself. Maybe I should return to the Cape, I thought. Maybe the mother I'd hoped to find did die and was buried back in Providencetown. What had happened to Mommy to make her so selfish? Or what had I been too blind to realize that was her true self? Mommy was right about going to sleep with sadness, like a rock on your chest, however. I tossed and turned and sobbed and sighed throughout most of the night, unable to get Carrie's sad eyes out of my mind. I finally fell asleep just before morning and slept so soundly I didn't hear Richard and Mommy get up. I did wake when I heard him shout my way. Well, this is a fine thing. We don't have coffee made. What sort of maid did you hire, Gina? Turns out she's lazier than you. I got up quickly, throwing on one of Mommy's light cotton robes, and stepped out into the living room. Richard was already dressed, and Mommy was dressed rather nicely, I thought, and came out of the bedroom too. I'll make some coffee, I said. It won't be long. I started toward the kitchen. We can't wait, Richard said, his eyes fixed hard on me. I realized I wasn't wearing much, and he seemed to be able to look right through my flimsy night clothes. We'll get something at the studio. Clean up our bedroom while we're gone. I left some more of my things for you to iron, he added, and started toward the front door. Mommy looked at me, her face somber. Wish me luck, she finally said. Good luck. Thank you, she said, flashing a smile. Then she followed Richard out of the apartment. I listened to their footsteps disappear down the hallway toward the elevator. Then I went into the kitchen and put on some coffee for myself. I sat there more or less in a daze, sipping my coffee and nibbling on some toast and jam. Before long, my mind wandered back to the memories of myself and Carrie on the beach. I thought about Kenneth and his doggy Lasis, and I remembered the first meeting Holly and the fun we had talking like sisters. How could Mommy want this kind of life, I thought. Despite herself and the mean things she said to me last night after I told her about Uncle Jacob, her eyes did soften occasionally. Deep in her heart, I told myself she wants to go home. I've just got to get her to realize it. Still wearing my nightie and Mama's robe, I cleaned up the bedroom and began ironing Richard's pants and shirts. I worked without a thought, moving like some kind of robot dazed in the tragic events. A little after noon, I finally put the work aside and went into the bathroom to take a shower. I stood there letting the warm water beat on the top of my head and my eyes closed, the steam flowing over my face. Finally, I shut off the shower and stepped from behind the curtain. For a moment, I was confused. I knew I had brought a towel in and my clothes, but there was just a hand towel on the rack and none of my clothes were in sight. Not trusting my own memory, I figured I had intended to do these things because of being in such a deep thought. I hadn't. Dripping wet, I ran out of the bathroom to the bedroom, and as soon as I entered, the door closed behind me. I hadn't been the one to close it. Richard stood there leering at me. He was stark naked himself. Silent screams stuck in my throat. What are you doing? Where's Mommy? I finally shouted and rushed to the bed to pull the top of the sheet and throw it around me. Brittle as thin glass. His laughter cracked across the room. He stepped forward, not making any attempt to hide his manliness from my sight. I told you to stop calling her Mommy, he said, still smiling. Where is she? What are you doing? She's at her audition. She'll be there most of the day. There's a lot of actresses trying out for the part, so I thought, why hang around? I decided while I'm waiting, I might as well make myself useful. I've been wondering why you would run around on such an easy job for a lot of money yesterday. And I figured it out. Simply because you're too innocent. You need to grow up and fast, or you'll never amount to anything. Consider this extra service. Call it my generosity, he continued, moving closer and closer until he was only inches away. I turned and looked down rather than his face. His breath stank from alcohol and began to upset my stomach. I felt it doing flip-flops. Come on, he said. I know you're looking forward to this. Get away from me, I cried. He put his right hand on my shoulder and his left hand on my waist, forcing me to turn to him. Relax and enjoy, he said, bringing his lips close to mine. I swung my head and tried to pivot out of his grasp, but he tightened his hold and pressed his lips against my mouth. I gagged and kicked out, catching him between his legs with my knee. His face exploded like a balloon bursting, and he crumpled, clutching over his lower stomach. I didn't wait. I pushed past him and started to run from the room, holding onto the sheet. Somehow he managed to reach out and clutch the end of the sheet and holding on. It tugged me back until I let go and fled the room, totally naked. I returned to the bathroom, slammed the door shut, and locking it after me. Then I stood there for a moment, gasping, sobbing, listening to my heart pounding. I leaned against the door to brace myself. The memory of the stench coming from his mouth made me dry heave. You little bitch, I heard him shout. He came out of the door and tried the handle. Open up. How dare you knee me like that? I'm letting you stay here, aren't I? He pounded on the door with his fist and I screamed. Then he stopped and all was quiet for a long moment. I tried to hold my breath so I could listen, but my lungs were stretched to bursting, and the lump, thump, thump in my heart was echoing in my eardrums. You'll be sorry, he finally said in a loud whisper between the door and the door jamb. I could have taught you something, made you grow up overnight. You would have been sophisticated enough for anything. But Richard Marlin doesn't allow himself to get turned down more than once. It's your loss, he added. You hear? He punched the door again, and I cried out and backed away, afraid that he would break the door down. After a while, I heard only silence, and then, when I drew closer to the door and put my ear against it, I heard him walk away. I didn't come out. I sat in the tub and waited with my arms folded tightly under my breasts, my sobbing slowing and my breathing returning to normal. I heard the front door open and close. All was quiet. Was it a trick to get me to come out of the bathroom? I waited and waited, listening, hoping he would grow impatient if he was still out there. But I heard nothing. Suddenly the phone rang. It rang, and I imagined if he were still there, he would be too concerned. The call was for him, and he would answer it. More confident he was gone, I unlocked the door as carefully as I could, and I hesitated in fractions of an inch at a time. Opened it until I could peer out. I didn't see him anywhere. I looked across the dining room area to my bedroom. The door was wide open. Was he waiting inside the room again? I tried to swallow, to stop my heart from racing again, but I couldn't. His attack had made my legs weak and my whole body trembled as I opened the bathroom door wider and wider until I stepped out, and then waited, terrified he'd suddenly appear and lunge at me. He didn't. My courage growing, I practically tiptoed across the floor to the doorway of my bedroom. There I paused to listen. I heard nothing. I took a deep breath and walked into my bedroom, gazing around quickly, clenching my hands into little fists with which to pummel him if he should pop out at me. He wasn't anywhere in sight. I closed the door quickly. My heart fell. What if he's hiding in the closet? I waited, listening again for a moment, hearing nothing. I went to the closet door and pulled it open. Then the wind from my jerking open the door shook my clothes on the hangers, but thankfully there was no Richard Marlin hiding and waiting to pounce out at me. I got dressed as quickly as I could, then I fled the apartment, feeling trapped and in danger of a horrible repeat performance if I remained there. I didn't look at anyone when I hurried down the walkway. Like someone in a race, I shot through the main gate and charged down the sidewalk. I walked as quickly as I could, not looking back, crossing streets, fighting traffic, hurrying along as if I knew where I wanted to go. It felt good to move quickly. It stopped my body from trembling, and the farther away from the Egyptian gardens I walked, the safer I felt. Finally tired, my body was in a heavy sweat. I paused at the corner and undecided which direction I should continue. I gazed at the street sign that read Melrose Avenue, and then I looked around at other people. Up until this moment, I hadn't noticed anyone or anything. I had walked with blind eyes, focused only fleeing from Richard's awful grasp. Now I found myself in a very curious area of the city. Very young people with blue, green, and pink hair, dressed in leather jackets and jeans, walked past in front of me. Many had tattoos covering their arms and chest. 2 girls even had rings in their noses. I felt like I had stepped into another planet. I backed up, turned, and started walking the opposite direction. Everyone in this city did seem to be in his or her own movie, I thought, feeling as if I'd wandered into a movie set. I didn't know whether I should laugh or cry. After I walked a few minutes, the neighborhood changed again, and I slowed my pace, quickly realizing that I was lost. I stopped again and gazed around, this time seeing a small store window on my left that read Madame Marlene's Readings. I saw crystals and tarot cards, and I thought about Holly and Billy. It brought a smile to my lips. Impulsively, perhaps, searching for good memories at a very troubled time, I stepped into the small shop. There was a dark cherry wood table and 2 chairs at the center of the room. The crystals were in small glass case on the right, and at the rear of the shop was a doorway like the one in Holly's shop, curtained with strings of beads. When I entered, a small buzzer had gone off. A short, dark-haired elderly lady came through the doorway of beads. She wore a shimmery white shawl over a dark blue dress and had silver earrings with crystals that glittered like diamonds between the long strands of hair falling over her shoulders. Her dark eyes were large, but she made them appear even larger with the smudgy kohl eyeliner. "Hello," she said. "I'm Madame Marlene. Would you like a reading?" I shook my head. I just... You look upset," she said. "Please," she added, pointing to the seat by the table. "Rest a moment and tell me what troubles you." "I'm lost," I said. "I'm new here. I don't remember how to get back to my apartment complex." "Which complex, my dear?" she asked, her smile soft and friendly. She looked to be about 50, not much more than 5 feet tall. "The Egyptian gardens," I said. "You're not very lost. Just go down 2 streets and make a left, and you'll run into it in about 10 minutes, I think." "There's more troubling you, though, isn't there?" I nodded and gazed around her shop. "I have a friend in New York City who has a crystal shop who does astrological readings for people. Her name's Holly." "That's interesting," Madame Marlene said. A knowing twinkle came into her eyes. "You really came in here because you wanted to know something else, yes?" she pursued, her head tilted slightly, her eyes even more luminous as the dim overhead light caught them in the warm glow. I thought for a moment, then nodded. "I want to know if someone I loved would ever return to me," I said. She nodded as if she'd always known I would show up on her doorstep. "Sit down, please," she said. "I just left my apartment quickly. I don't have any money on me." "Oh, that's all right," she said. "You can send me something later." She sat at her table, motioning for me to sit down across from her. She reached out immediately and took my right hand into hers and held it, closing her eyes. Then she nodded to herself and looked down at my open palm. "You've already been on quite a rugged road," she said, "with many twists and turns. Your life has more valleys than most, but I see some very high places too. I see you've lost loved ones, yes? Yes. Yet you have strong energy. What's your name?" "Melanie." "I see music in you, yes. This person, this loved one who's lost, has been lost for a while." "Yes," I said. She looked at my hand again, and then she reached out to touch the locket Billy Maxwell had given me. She turned it in her fingers a moment. "Lapis lazuli. Someone you like very much, and someone who likes you very much gave it to you." "That's right," I said. "You're like a comet, something beautiful and full of energy floating through space, searching for a home, your real home." "I am," I said, excited that she seemed to know so much about me. "Someone you're searching for is coming," she said, closing her eyes again. Seconds later she opened them, and this time there was no smile on her lips. "Where you are looking for love, there is no love. You'll have to change direction. But don't worry, your energy is too strong to be defeated. Do not be afraid to turn toward the darkness. For often what we think is sunlight is merely the reflection coming from our own glow. Do not look for love in the usual places," she concluded and sat back, as if reading my palm, feeling my energy, and predicting my life had exhausted her. "Thank you," I said, standing, uncertain if I would be able to follow her advice. "Oh, it's my pleasure. It's always my pleasure to read a heart as big as yours. Here," she said, opening the drawer of her desk to pluck out her business card. "This has my address. I usually get $20, but you can send me $15. "Thank you," I said, taking the card from her wrinkled hand. "Your locket will bring you as much luck on your journey. Keep it with you always," she called as I went out the door. "I will. Bye." I stepped out feeling revived, calmer. It would take time to understand all she said, but I would think about it. Since I had been with Holly and Billy and paid more attention to these things, I wasn't so quick to laugh at anyone or anything that seemed new and different to me. I was leaving myself open to new ideas and experiences, but there were still some things I definitely do without. Dreading facing Richard again, I headed back to the apartment, following the directions Madame Marlene had given me. A little over a half hour later, I turned into the main gate with great trepidation. Made my way to our building and then to the elevator. When I stepped out and walked to the apartment door, I paused. I had to tell Mommy what he tried to do, I decided. Maybe finally she would see him for what he truly was. I opened the door and entered, surprised to find them both smiling in the living room. Mommy looked like she'd been crying all afternoon. Her eyes were bloodshot, her face streaked with makeup that had run. Richard sat there looking calm, his legs crossed, and a drink in one hand and a cigarette in the other. He gazed up at me with a confident smirk that put a chill in my heart. "So you decided to come back," Richard said. "What did you do, Melanie? Run away afterward?" "Yes," I said defiantly, gazing back at Richard as I spoke. "I did. I was too scared to stay here. I was afraid he would come back and try again." "Ha," Richard said, and crushed his cigarette in the ashtray. "Listen to that." "Melanie, how could you?" Mommy asked. "How could I what?" I looked from her to him and then back to her, realizing he had told her some lie. "It was him, Mommy, and I don't care if I called you Mommy," I added quickly for his benefit. "He attacked me in the bedroom. He came into the bathroom while I was taking a shower and he..." "Liar. She's just like I said," Richard interrupted. conniving sly. Tell the truth for once, will you? The truth? I was sitting here, right here where I am now, relaxing and planning on making some important calls, when all of a sudden she comes out of the bathroom after taking a shower and parades naked right in front of me, he told Mommy. She walked right up to me as if she were fully dressed and smiled. Go on, tell her, he challenged me. No, I said, shaking my head. That's not what happened, Mommy. He took all my clothes out of the bedroom when I came and went into the bedroom, and he was waiting for me, and he was naked. Did you ever hear such a story, Gina? Look, Melanie, you've been trying to compete with Gina ever since you arrived. You made a spectacle of yourself down at the pool, and you tried to steal the limelight at the party. I get you a job, but that's not good enough for you. Oh no, you'd rather we support you too. Mommy, listen. He was there in the bedroom waiting for me. He told me he was going to educate me. Educate you. The story gets more and more stupid every time she opens her mouth. Listen, sweetheart, you're going to have to do better than that if you want to make it in Hollywood. I don't want to make it in Hollywood, and neither do you, Mommy. You have to come home. You have to leave this place, I cried. See, Richard Marlin said, jabbing his finger at me. That's been her plan all along, to mess things up for you so you would leave. She's jealous of her own mother. I've seen it 100 times, and especially out here. Now she says she doesn't care if she calls you Mommy. She'll do it deliberately in front of people and make you the laughing stock of the whole industry. She's already made us a mountain of trouble because of what she did at the live wire. Mommy, I said, turning to her. She shook her head at me. I'm very disappointed in you, Melanie. I really don't know what to say. Say you believe me. Say you know that he's a liar and he's a phony. He can't do anything out here. That all he's doing is getting you these silly little jobs or selling you to sex merchants, I begged. Richard sat back, looking very satisfied. Mommy bit down on her lower lip and looked away. Mommy. Keep it up, keep it up. Keep calling her Mommy, Richard chanted like a cheerleader at the football game. Maybe Richard's right, Melanie. Maybe it's better for all of us if you just go back. This isn't working out. You believe him, Mommy? I choked, barely able to whisper the words. She didn't reply. I saw the grin on Richard's face, and I glared back at him hatefully. He looked so confident, and my mom looked so weak under his control. My frustration and pride overflowed. Maybe you deserve him then, I said, and fled to my bedroom to pack my bags. 20 minutes later, after the phone had rung, I heard Richard yelling, blaming Mommy for not getting yet another part. Then I heard him leave the apartment minutes later. Mommy came to my bedroom. She wore her sunglasses and she looked pale and unhappy. I guess you heard, she said, I didn't get the call back from today's audition. Richard says it's because I'm too distracted these days. Maybe it's because you're not meant to be an actress, Mommy, I said, and closed my bag. No, I can do it. I know I can. It's just taking a little longer than I expected, that's all. I didn't do what he said I did, Mommy. It was the other way around, I swear. It doesn't matter, Melanie. Richard's right. You don't belong here. And I don't know what I was thinking when I agreed to let you stay. You were thinking like my mother, I told her. You were thinking about doing the right thing. She smiled. You were always a dreamer. Me? I started to laugh. Look at you, Mommy. Look where you are. This place grows dreams like we grow weeds back in Sewell. I meant you're a dreamer because you always saw more in me than there is. I'm sorry, honey. I'm not the mother you want me to be. I nodded. Maybe finally she was speaking the truth. I sat on the bed and stared into my lap. What are you going to do? Do you have any money, Mommy asked. Yes, I have most of my money. I didn't tell Richard the truth. He would have taken it all. I have my return ticket, too. I'll go to the airport and get myself on the first flight that I can, I added. And go back to Providencetown? Yes. Good. I'll be happier knowing you're safe and you'll be safe there, she said. You mean then your conscience won't bother you, don't you, Mommy? I shot back at her. She started to get angry and then her shoulders sank and she nodded. Yes, she admitted. I guess it's time for the lies between us to stop. I stared at her, trying to blink away my disbelief. Chester was always a better father to you than I was a mother, she said, and she laughed. And the funny thing is he wasn't your real father, though that didn't bother him at all. Mommy, I said, sucking my breath, when you left me in Providence Town and I discovered the truth about you and my stepdaddy, I started to think that Kenneth was my real father. I just knew that you had been lying about Grandpa Samuel. Please tell me the truth, please. She looked at me for a long moment, and I thought she was going to shake her head and walk away, but she came further in the room instead. I hated them, she said, as you know. When Judge Childs told me he was my real father, and therefore Kenneth and I were half-brother and half-sister, I felt as if he'd reached his hand into my chest and ripped out my heart. I felt so betrayed, Melody. You can't imagine. Here were all these high and mighty people, always making me feel like someone inferior because my mother had me out of wedlock, and Olivia had to take me like some wayward orphan. They never stopped reminding me how grateful I should be, how lucky I was. And all the while, the lot of them were no better, and in fact much worse. They were deceitful, greedy people, liars. So I decided I would get back at them. When they realized I was pregnant, Olivia was ready to pounce and point her finger at me and shout, See, this proves how low down and no good she is, how she's nothing more than a tramp. But I fooled her. I fooled the whole lot of them when I turned the tide and accused Samuel of being the father of my unborn baby, Olivia. Mommy smiled at the memory, almost died of embarrassment. She was sick in her room for days. I told her I would expose the whole sinful lot of them. I would shout it in the streets. Chester always loved me. He was quick to take my side, especially when I went to him and cried on his shoulder. He promised to look after me no matter what. I played them all against each other. Chester and Jacob fought. Olivia pulled her tail between her legs and crawled into a hole. I felt sorry for Samuel, but he was someone to pity anyway, letting her bulldoze him all the time, pretending he didn't know she was really in love with Nelson Childs, who had an affair with his sister, my mother. They were hideously cruel to her. They put her away in an institution and made me ashamed of my own mother. Nothing I did to them equaled what they had done to me, Melanie. I regret nothing except what I had done to you. I'm sorry, but I know you're going to be all right. Not until I know the whole truth, Mommy. I want to know who my real father is. You gotta tell me. She nodded and turned her back to me as she turned to gaze out the window. I was wild. I wanted so much to hurt them all, to keep hurting them and embarrass them. I drank and hung out with older friends, flirted with everyone. And then one night, after I'd been drinking, I decided I'd walk home. It was a warm night full of stars, I remember, and I got dizzy every time I looked up at the sky. Suddenly he was there in his car beside me. I turned and he rolled down his window and asked me why I was walking home so late at night. He sounded so protective and concerned. He said he would drive me home, so I got in his car. Only he didn't drive me home. He drove me to the beach road. And he talked about how unhappy his life was, and he was married to a beautiful woman and making a lot of money, but how he could still be dissatisfied. His life was missing something, some excitement, he said. Whenever he saw me, no matter where I was or what I was doing, he was filled with that once-in-a-lifetime excitement. Mommy turned to me. You have to understand how it was for me, Melanie. No man had ever spoken to me like that. I was swept off my feet, and this man, he was successful, well-to-do, and he was telling me I was more important to him, and how could I resist? I made love with him, and it was special. We met often, secretly, and then I became pregnant with you, and it all went out of control. It wouldn't have done me any good to reveal his identity. He wouldn't leave his family for me, and when Olivia attacked me, I made my decision to get my revenge. I never told anyone the truth, not Chester, not Kenneth, no one. I held my breath until I could hold it no more. Who is he, Mommy? Is he still in Providencetown? Yes, honey, he is, she said. His name is Teddy Jackson. They call him TJ, she said. I know my heart stopped beating for a moment. I know my blood drained from my face. I felt the room spin. Mommy grasped my hand. I closed my eyes and battled for a breath. Are you all right? I didn't reply. I waited until my heart started beating again, swallowed and nodded. His son, I said, Adam Jackson, tried to be my boyfriend when I first arrived. Oh no, did you want to be his girlfriend? No, I hated him. He's arrogant. Good, she said. For a moment, I thought I did to you what Judge Childs had done to Kenneth and me. I think I had a feeling about Mr. Jackson, Mommy. He's spoken to you? From time to time, and whenever he has, he's been very nice. He'll never come forward and admit it, honey. He has a family, a position in the community. I don't care. I just wanted to know who he was, I said. Thank you for that, Mommy. I stood up. Madame Marlene has been right when she read my palm. I was looking for love in the wrong place. Maybe you shouldn't go yet, Melanie. Maybe you should stay another day. No, I don't belong here, Mommy. And Carrie needs me. He needs me far more than you do, I said. My mother stared at me as if I was a stranger, and then she nodded. The lies would end between us, and like two people who had finally lifted the masks from their faces, we finally saw each other for who we truly were. And we both knew we would have to live with that forever, for better or for worse.